Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to episode 40 of the podcast. It's hard to believe, but we're coming up on 1 year of the podcast. 52 episodes is coming up just around the corner here in just a few months. It's gone by real fast, and it's been a lot of fun. And if you've been listening for a while, I hope you've enjoyed it. I have certainly enjoyed interviewing these leaders and learning from them and applying that to our ministry and to my personal life. And today's interview is no different. In this interview, I talk with Tom Bump. Tom's a children's pastor and a friend of mine who's been in children's ministry for 3 decades. And we talk about what has he learned? What has he learned in 3 decades of ministry? And really a few themes come out. We talk about delegation, which is huge. We talk about conflict with staff and with leadership, which can happen from time to time, and Tom gets real vulnerable and open and honest about that. You'll appreciate his story there and his journey and what he shares with that. And whatever role you serve in, I imagine you'll be able to relate to some of what he shares in this interview. So before we jump into the interview, just want to remind you that I have a free resource that you can download with 100 ways that you can show appreciation to your volunteers, 100 ideas. Some are free, some are less than $5. Some are a little bit more than that. You can get that and all the notes from this interview in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 40. So let's go ahead and jump into my conversation with Tom. Well, I'm here with Tom Bump at Children's Pastors Conference in sunny Orlando, Florida. Tom, how you doing?
Yeah, doing great, Nick.
Yeah, it's a great place to be. It's really nice. Both of us are from up north, and so coming down here in January.
This is called Suffering for Jesus.
Exactly. It's pretty awesome. But Tom and I are friends and wanted to have Tom on the podcast, and so we could talk about longevity in ministry and a lot of pieces of that. But before we jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who's not familiar with you.
Well, Tom Bump, it's got the rough name, Bump on a Log, and I've heard all the jokes. So, I always say my first son's name was Speed.
Nice.
But no.
Yeah, that would have been hard. Hard school.
Yes.
For that.
I've been in ministry pretty much all my life because I was a pastor's kid and grew up in the church, so I was a church rat and married my high school sweetheart, April, and we've been married. We'll be celebrating 30 years in August of 2017. So
that's awesome.
Pretty cool.
That's cool.
And God's blessed us with 4 kids, boy, girl. At the time now, they're from 26 to 19. So we're in a new stage of life.
Yeah.
Almost empty nesters, even though 3 still live at home with us. We haven't kicked them out yet. So.
It's happening. Is there a time hey, you got to get out?
Well, they're starting to realize mom and dad are starting to do things on their own, going on vacations and doing different things.
So, you're living the empty nester life, whether they want to acknowledge it or not.
We really are. We spend most of the time in the evenings. We're down in the one room by ourselves in the living room hanging out, and the kids are all up on the computers doing their things, so we don't see them a whole lot at night sometimes when they come down for food. So
of course,
but I've been in church ministry. Started really doing full-time ministry at 19 with a ministry called Child Evangelism Fellowship, and was a local director in Indiana and Michigan, and developed some programs for them. But then also missed the church. I missed being connected with people all the time, and so. God called me into the youth ministry, and I started doing youth and children in some smaller churches, and moved around a little bit. God moved us into some churches that a lot of guys probably would have overlooked, but for some reason, I guess with a name like Bump, he figured I could handle the rough stuff. So I went in and took some of these challenges on, and God really has blessed, and I've learned a lot. Over the years for serving in these kind of places, and I'm using it now to help others. So currently I'm outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and serving as a children's pastor, and loving life. Really, I am.
Cool. Well, and we're going to talk specifically about serving 3 decades basically in ministry and what you've learned, what's it take to serve that long, and then even hit some of the themes and things that you've learned from throughout your experience. So generally speaking. What are the things that are important when it comes to serving long term, to having that longevity, being able to stick, not burn out, all the things that can happen?
I think one of the first things is knowing your calling, and understanding, how God called you into ministry, and knowing that that's your place. A lot of times, you get into ministry with these grand dreams but yet sometimes that grand dream isn't to stay in children's ministry. You do, some of us do look at it as a stepping stone to say, well, I'm going to move up to associate or a family pastor or a senior pastor kind of thing, and, for me, I knew that God called me to ministry first and foremost. And that was a real clear moment in my life that I knew, that God was saying, this is where I want you. And so I was pretty certain on that. And that one thing always is my go-to point. That's my North Star. When life gets hard and ministry gets hard, I go back to that moment of where I knew very clearly that this was that time of saying, God, I'm yours. I'm gonna go, send me. And, so that was a real, pivotal point. And I think a lot of people, they get shaky because they don't know what God called them into or for. And so I think knowing that calling is a huge thing for, setting yourself up for a long term, because you won't be tempted to quit as much, I think, if hey, God called me here, and until he releases me to something else, I got to stay on this.
So what did that call look like for you? Because I think most people don't have the audible, you know what I mean? Or the writing, like something that's like, this is very obviously Gideon tested call from God. Like most of us don't get that. So what did that look for you, and how could you be, as confident in it as you said?
There was two things that happened. First thing that happened was that God rattled me to my core with, I was in Detroit, Michigan, teaching a 5-day Bible club. Very first club of the summer, I was traveling for the ministry, and I was in a very affluent neighborhood, and churches there was 3 churches within walking distance of where I was doing this club. And I opened up my Bible story book and was starting to teach about creation, and I talked about God being the creator. And this little girl, there was only 4 kids, but this little girl just stone cold stared me in the eyes and said, "Who's God?" And I thought she was joking. I honestly did, because I'm thinking nobody in America that lives in this neighborhood who are close to a church would say that. But she was serious. And so I had the privilege of walking through who I knew God to be. And I really didn't tell much of the scripted story that day, but just to sit there with open my Bible to Genesis and walk her through, and these other kids, because they all leaned in. And it was cool because at the end of that time of walking through the gospel with her, on that very first day, she accepted Christ. I mean, she's like, I want this. And before I could even ask her the question, do you want to know Jesus as your Savior? She was like, how do I do this? I mean, it was almost that Acts situation of what do I got to do to be saved? I mean, that really was that moment. And that hit me so hard. And all day long, I couldn't get her out of my head because I thought, how many more are like her? And it was at that moment that in my heart, I knew that that's what God wanted me to do. He sealed the deal really a couple of years later in my life, where I was looking at going into CEF as a local director in Indiana. And I was 19 years old, and this committee had asked me to come down and interview with the state board, and I had to get approval because I was young. I didn't have a Bible college degree, and normally they didn't hire anybody unless you had that. I had been praying. I had not told a single person that, Lord, these people don't know me. And I was kind of doing the whole Gideon throwing out the fleece thing. But I said, Lord, these people don't know me. And I guess the only way I'm going to really know that this is what you're wanting me to do in my life is I need that board to vote 100%. And in church world, sometimes getting 100% is a miracle.
Jesus is probably the one that got 100% most churches if he was going to be the pastor.
I think that's true. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm in this room with all these old guys, and they're asking me these questions, and sometimes I was struggling with answers and things, and I wasn't sure how I was doing. I was terrified. And all of a sudden, the state director, he's like, well, any more questions? And everybody just kind of shook their head no. And so I'm like, okay. And so I started to get up to leave, and he put his hand on my leg and said, "Sit down, son." And I'm like, okay. And he said, "Mr. Chairman, I moved that we call Tom to the ministry." And so I'm like, okay, I got to get up. And so he puts his hand on my leg and says, "Sit down." And this is there a second? And the guy gave a second. And so I'm thinking, okay, they're going to vote. I need to get up and leave. And he puts his hand a third time on my leg and says, "Sit down." And I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to be, he was a big guy, so he had a big hand and he was pushing my knee down. And I'm like, what in the world's happening here? And all of a sudden they voted, and they went right around the room. There was 7 men, and they all said yes. And I was just stunned. I shouldn't have been, because that's exactly what I was asking God to show me, but he did it right in front of my face. And I walked out of that room, and the state director came out, and I looked at him and I said, "Mike, has that ever been done before? Why did you do that?" And he said, "First, no, that's never been done before. Second, I just had this real strong impression from God that you needed to see what we were going to do there." And that's when I told him, well, this is what I was praying for, and you don't even have to wait for because he was asking if I was going to accept the vote. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah. There's no question. So God sealed that decision right there in a very visible way, not an audible way, but it was a visible way. And I know not everybody gets that kind of calling kind of thing, but boy, man, when you get that kind of strong impression that was confirmed, I knew my gifting. I knew that people had been telling me I should be in ministry. But I wasn't sure if that was really what I wanted to spend my life with. I was looking maybe being a teacher, because I liked talking. I liked teaching kids, but God just used that and the words of affirmation of others, and then he just sealed the deal with me in a very powerful way. So for me, that calling, that's what I go back to. I remember those moments when I'm going, am I really supposed to be doing this? I could be doing other things. I did sales for a while and other things, and I was good at it. I made a lot of money at it. And almost didn't want to go back into ministry, but God reminded me of what he called me to. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to that. And so that's what we're doing.
I think a part of calling and knowing if God's called you to something is being able to look back on it. Because I know for me, I never tended to work for a church. Felt really good. Felt like it was the move to make, was passionate about it. Kind of like you're saying, people affirm that, which was important. But really, it was for me to be able to look back now. It's a lot easier to say, yes, God called me then. Right. In the moment, it was like, I think, maybe. Yeah. I feel like I'm kind of volunteering. I'm not really sure. You know what I mean? Yeah. So is that the case for you as well?
I think at that moment, that night, when I went back to my room and was reflecting on that day with that little girl, that was like, okay, all right, God, I'm saying yes, And those days afterwards, I went and I went home to my parents. I talked to them about it. My dad says, man, it does sound like, this is something, you are good at doing this. You've been doing it. You've got a track record now. And I think, for somebody that's saying, am I called to ministry? I would say to them, look at, your life and what you're doing. Look at your gifting. Are you and get some people around you that can give you some honest feedback. Am I using my gifts in a way that could be used in a church? And do you see God's hand of blessing on my life? Are people coming to Christ because of my life and my ministry? Are they growing? And am I bringing other leaders along with me? Those kind of things. I think God uses those types of things to confirm that call. Like I said, to say that, yeah, I know, but it takes time sometimes. As you start going, you finally start seeing things line up. And I can look back and go, wow, I started out helping my mom in a Bible club with a frog puppet on my hand, teasing her all the time and driving her crazy, causing probably more problems than helping. And then I became a Sunday night. Nobody wanted to teach Bible club in our church on Sunday night. And I started doing it. I had my old flannel graph figures. Nice. And I started with 5 kids on a Sunday night, and we ended up getting about 20 kids. And finally somebody said, hey, we better get some help back there for Tom. I mean, he's only like 12 years old. And I had a couple kids that were close to my age even. And little by little, I kept seeing people say, wow, this is really where you belong. You're good at this. God's equipped you to do something like this. So that calling has just, been affirmed. Yeah. It was more than just, do I feel this way? But other people were affirming it, saying, you need to go into ministry.
Yeah. And why, that's huge. Wise counsel is huge, especially from people who have no stake in it. That way they can give you the objective opinion. That's big. Yeah. So obviously, and I agree, knowing your purpose, because it's going to be hard. There's that joke, if you're a pastor, never quit on Monday. Yeah. Church is going to be hard, ministry is going to be hard. And so sometimes they learn your calling. What else would you say has been helpful for the longevity to do it for 3 decades and still be passionate about it?
I think there's a couple more things. One of those things is doing what you do best. I think when I started figuring things out for myself, I started looking at, what am I good at? Where my talents lie? Where's my gifting? And so I started developing those skills. I got training. I got equipped. I had people who started looking at my personality, and the training classes that I started taking on teaching kids, I started learning how to present a lesson, how to prepare it. I learned how to teach a Bible verse and how to teach a song without just saying, hey, let's sing. I learned to introduce it and a way to break it down and explain the words. And so I started doing those kind of things, and people kept me focused on, this is what I do. Sometimes we in ministry, we get to be the jack of all trades and the master of none.
Yeah, sure. Especially in both children's ministry and youth ministry in particular. Yeah. Because it's almost like, you probably agree, both children's ministry and youth ministry are almost like just a smaller version of the church.
Yes.
They have teaching, they have some kind of small groups and care and administration and resourcing and events. And it's And then usually though, with most churches, with the size they are, it's one person leading. I mean, volunteers, but one staff.
Yeah. And I think, one of the keys too is knowing who you are, who you are as a person. There's sometimes where it's wishful thinking that we could be a leader. And I've had some people go, I feel God's calling me to be a children's pastor. Well, I started asking them, first off, has anybody affirmed you? Are you getting affirmations from other people? Do you believe that God has put that desire inside of you to do that? And are others confirming that desire? Is your gifting and talents really fit for that? And who you are in Christ. And I think, for me, that's a huge thing. And then knowing what I can do, what are my abilities, and knowing that, okay, if I'm not great at administration, then I'm going to have to find people to help me with those kind of things. I'm going to have to, delegate that off at some point, because that's not my gifting. And so I think, one of the things that I've discovered about myself is understanding that, and I've heard this from my mentor, Jim Weidman, a lot, is, do what you do best and give off the rest, and that's what I'm trying to focus on even more now in I guess I could say the twilight of my years. I don't like admitting that. I got called seasoned recently, and I was like, wow, that's just another term for old.
Sounds better though.
It does sound
like
a little
I like
nicer.
Seasoned. There's something about that that's actually good.
It does sound a little better. But I would say to younger leaders that are listening that, like I say, I'm going to review again. Go back to the calling. Know your identity and who you are and what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your personality, how God wired you to be. I didn't discover that soon enough, of my personality and things. And I was always ashamed of how I was wired sometimes, because I saw all these other people, you're not supposed to compare yourself to anybody else, but I was.
But people do. Yeah. If everybody's honest, you do that if you're not careful,
And I was guilty of looking around and going, oh man, all these administrative people with their checklists and they're not missing anything or forgetting anything. At least I didn't think they were.
Sure.
I've discovered talking to them that they are missing things too. But I was that creative, flighty, always running and gunning and mock through my hair on fire guy. And sometimes drove my volunteers nuts that way. But I learned my identity, and it was like, you know what? I'm more secure now with who I am, that I'm okay with that. And I just know I've got to work with others and let them do what they do best. Because if I'm doing that, that's going to be really cool for them. But it's going to be even better for me as a children's pastor, as a leader, because then I can focus on those things that God has really equipped me to. I'm a storyteller. I have that gift of gab, That's the extra spiritual gift. It's an asterisk.
It wasn't quite mentioned, but maybe it was one of those.
And most of us have that gift, but here's the thing: I've learned to focus it, and I've worked really hard at being a better storyteller and studying good storytellers and practicing and developing those skills. Again, going back to that's who God wired me to be. So I want to be the best that I can be. So I want to be one of the best storytellers. I want to move people with those stories in a direction to grow. And so I think that's a huge thing. I know I kind of blurred those two together, but
you would say, because the other thing I think this is also what you're saying. Part of the reason why it's big for longevity is, practically speaking, if you had to do a lot of administration because you didn't really know who you were and how you're wired and lean into that, you probably wouldn't like ministry and you might quit. Right. I mean, It might be that simple. Like, what? I actually don't like this.
Yeah.
And I've tried to do it because I feel like it's my calling. So I've tried to do it for 10 years or however long. And then, ministry's hard anyway. So other stuff gets lumped on top of that. And when you end up not liking 80% of the job, you probably don't last. Yeah. Versus you found your niche. You're trying to delegate these things you're not great at.
And I've heard it, and you probably have too, from younger leaders, this isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
because they saw the really cool, fun side. They saw the wild craziness up on the stage, and shooting TP shooters or blowing things up or, Mentos and Diet Coke, experiments. And they see that side of the ministry. They just don't see the other side.
Yeah.
And when they get into it and they realize, oh, I got to think about cotton balls or glue sticks or goldfish crackers.
Yeah.
And then I've got to manage all these personalities and then I've got to manage these parents that have expectations and staff, pastors that expect, leaders, elders, deacons, and people, they spin out of control because they're like, oh, I can't handle all that. And so, if you're an administrative type and you're the strategic planner, then be that and find the creative people and surround yourself with them. And be content with that. Don't feel guilty that you're not up on the stage. But if you're that stage person, make sure you've got those kind of other people around you, because the only way you're going to endure and be able to survive in ministry is to know who you are and how you're wired and what you can do and do it best.
Yeah, I like to use the analogy of especially with people in our church who volunteer and maybe we're thinking about working for a church. Even if I think they'd be a good fit, I love to use the analogy of a game, like a sport. Pick a sport like football or something. If you love game day, that doesn't mean you're going to love being on staff at a church, because game day is Sunday. It's, 5 hours for a church, 6 hours, 7 hours. During the week, it's practice. And it's in the classroom, and it's all this. It's like the difference between being a coach and a player. Now, of course, players practice during the week too, but are you wanting to lead and equip others and do all that behind the scenes work? And the bad thing about that analogy, obviously, is that church isn't all about one day and it's not a game and all of that. Yeah. But just the idea that somebody could love, for instance, being a volunteer teaching kids. Well, that doesn't mean you love working for a church, because you only get to teach kids a couple hours a week. But during the week, you're leading, you're doing this, communicating, caring for people, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I had a person come up to me one time and say, well, I really feel God's calling me to ministry. And I said, well, what is the best part about ministry? What do you think the best part? Why is it that God called you there? Well, I'm really good with kids and I like doing all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And he liked game day.
Yeah.
But and I said, well, you know what? Why can't you just, do that? Do it now, and if God confirms you and others affirm you, then take those steps. Get the training. Do all the behind the scenes stuff and prepare. God took Moses into that wilderness to prepare him to lead. He didn't want to lead, and then God had to bring in a substitute for him just to talk. Because he still didn't have that. And I think that's a good illustration for a lot of people. There's a lot of I want to be doing it, but you've got to be willing to pay the price all the way through it and know that this isn't just one of those, I'm going to jump in and jump out. If I'm going to do this, this is a calling. This is a lifelong commitment in my mind anyway, that you want to serve. And it's all I want to do. I mean, I can't think of anything else.
So like to get practical with the idea of doing what you do best and helping other people do that, I know you have talked about working through that in your ministry and delegating. And you said that you felt like you were doing it before, a while back, but in reality you were delegating a little bit, but you weren't really delegating. So tell me about what your part-time or sort of delegation looked like.
I was a part-time delegator. That's a great way to put it. Yes. Part-time delegation syndrome. We could. That's good.
What did did that look like? So what did you delegate? Did you just delegate things you really hated? Is that what that meant?
I started off, if I couldn't stand doing it, I'd say, hey, do you want to take care of, calling all the volunteers and scheduling, or do you want to find the substitutes for me? That kind of thing. Yeah. I'd hand off. I didn't like writing, emails or, at that time, letters when I first started. And so I would just kind of put bullet points, and because I didn't want to take the time to even think about how I would say things or why I would say things. I would make bullet points and hand it to our secretary and say, here, write the letter. And then I'd sign them.
Should make it sound good.
Yeah. And then when it came to my team, I would give them little jobs to do, you can help with check-in, or you can do this or that. But I never taught them why or how or gave them any inspiration. It was just, do it, but here's the way. I'm going to tell you how I want it done. And it wasn't that so much of I'm going to guide you. It's this is the way I want it done. Yeah. And so I was controlling it. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes if they weren't doing it, or if they missed 1 week, I would take it right back and start doing it myself. Because it was easier in my mind. I was living the lie that it's just easy. Instead of doing the work to find somebody else to do it, or believing the lie that there is no one else to do it. I used to have that if not me, then who syndrome.
Yeah.
If I don't do it, who's going to do it? I'm in a small church. I don't have a big volunteer pool, so nobody's going to do it. And that really became a lie that I bought into. I mean, it became a stronghold. It was, I refer to it as stinking thinking. Because I was so focused on, well, if nobody's going to do it as good as I will do it. So I better not give that part away. So I'll give these other little things away, and I hold on to the big rocks. Mm-hmm. And so, I really ultimately was a lone ranger for a lot of years, and it hurt me. It hurt me physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Even though I didn't want to believe that it did, but it was. And it's not a healthy thing to do if you want to be in ministry for the long haul. You can't fake it till you make it. You need to start making it right now. And I've started telling younger leaders, don't believe that stuff. Don't buy into the lies that you have to be the only one, even if you are in a small church or even a big church. Because even sometimes I serve in a larger church now, and sometimes I still saying, well, I don't know if anybody will do this, so I'll just do it.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, hey, would you like to help with the prep team? They're busy. I'll prep it myself, because it'll only take an hour. There's an hour that I could be doing what I do best.
Yeah, because there's a bunch of hours, hours. There's only an hour of that, only an hour of that.
Isn't that amazing? We only get 24.
Yeah.
We try to create more, but it doesn't work.
So you, in terms of delegating, and obviously it sounds like what you delegated were tasks.
Yes.
For the most part, so you can still have control over them because you want them done a certain way and all those things, which I think a lot of us can relate. I'm a control freak too, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are similar. We have ideas about how we want to get done. But now you would say that you do that differently, that you have been able to change how you delegate, what it looks like. So what does it look like now, and how's it better?
Well, and one of the things that I wouldn't delegate is because I was the storyteller, I wanted to be on the stage.
Oh, yeah. I see this a lot. Whatever you're most passionate about, whatever you're gifted at, you want to keep doing.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, again, I probably do it better than everybody else. My pride was getting in the way. And so all of a sudden, it started to hit me that I needed to let go of some of these things. So I read a book, Halftime. Now I'm going to forget the author's name.
That's okay. But we have the power of Google.
That's true.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Thank you for the show notes. But Halftime, was a fantastic book that rattled my cage to start thinking about leaving that legacy and thinking about how to finish strong. And so I started realizing that, you know what, if I want some good storytellers, if I want to take a vacation, I need to have some good storytellers. The only way they're going to be good storytellers is if I start working with them. So I decided, I made the conscious choice a number of years ago that I was going to start duplicating myself. I wanted to have a lot more storytellers than I even needed. So I started looking for people who had that gift of gab, but didn't just babble, but really had a great story to tell. And when they told it, I loved listening to it. And I started asking them, you know, hey, I think you're a great storyteller. And you know what? Sometimes I need a break. Would you be interested in working with me? And we'll work together, because I would love to have you do a story on a Sunday morning sometime, be a presenter. And I started bringing people on. And at first I started with just having them co-host on the stage with me, doing, you know, fun part. I would actually kind of be the silly guy. I'd let them do the straight part. I'd give them a little script. And I started watching them. And pretty soon I had these two guys that could totally go off script with me and improvise, which was a lot of fun because I love doing that. And so, I mean, I got the script, but you know, scripts are...
Yeah, it's just the starting.
They're guidelines.
Not everybody would see it that way, but you definitely see it that way.
I definitely see it that way. And so I found these guys, and we started telling stories together. And we started doing things on stage. And pretty soon, I got to the point where I was like, okay, you know what? In 3 weeks, I'm going to a conference. You're going to be on. You got this. And I said, but here's what we're going to do. Next week, I'm going to set it up, and then I'm going to walk off, and you do the story. I'm going to watch. And it's that whole thing. Do with me, then you do, I watch, you know, you watch, and, you know. And that pattern, and I started delegating those bigger stones that I carried. I started letting people, you know, do the Bible school ministry, and I didn't have to run all the meetings. I met with my leader. We went over the basic things that, you know, the expectations and the things that I needed for information, and I let her take it over and run it. And that was something I always carried. I was always in charge of Bible school. I was always in charge of storytelling. And I started looking for things that I was always doing and said, I need to train somebody else to do. So when I was doing all that prep work, I started training people to do that with me that love doing that stuff. I've got 3 people now in my current church. They love to do it. They'd never be a large group presenter. They'd never be a small group leader. But they love filling those bins and cutting out all that paper. And I hated every moment of that. I confess it all. I hated it. I mean, every time I look and I'm like, we got to cut out how many pairs of ears? You know, why? You know, just, I don't know. Sometimes I'd even edit those things out of the small group lessons. I'm sorry.
On purpose. You're like, nope, not happening.
Yeah, not happening, because I'm not cutting all that stuff out. Now, I don't mind leaving it in because I know they like it. I had one one of my leaders said that, a prep person that said they actually thought it was therapeutic. And I'm like, looking at him like...
You're like, it's the opposite for me. It's like stress.
My fingers cramp up just talking about that. So I learned that delegating and then truly letting them do it and saying, you know what? Yeah, did they do it the way I would do it? No, but they did it the way God wired them. And I have come to so appreciate my team and my storytellers because they're doing it the way they do it. I mean, a couple weeks ago, one of my leaders, the story presenters, they had the kids hiking around the room and searching for, I don't remember what it was, you know, and I'm just sitting there laughing, you know, because one, I probably would have freaked out thinking the kids are going to totally lose it and they're not going to pay attention to the story, or you'll never get them back in to the story when you ask them to sit back down again.
Yeah.
But they did.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. And I sat back and I'm going, all right. I mean, and that, you know, I can take a week or 2 off now because I got presenters. I couldn't do that before.
Yeah.
And it really hurt me, you know, and my family even, because I robbed them of some time because I was controlling it and I wouldn't delegate. So now, you know, I encourage people to find 1 or 2 things. Start with something simple.
Yeah.
And just give that one thing, you know, work with somebody, coach them, show them how you would do it. Let them, you know, win their heart so that they know your heart. And then they'll do it. And they'll probably do it way better. And honestly, like I say, my storyteller, I was like, wow, they rocked that lesson way better than I would have done it. I would have never thought of doing that method. I would have just had the kids in their seats and doing an object lesson or something.
Yeah.
I would have never thought about getting them up and moving like that, but they did. And so I think that's been really cool for me to learn to delegate, let the control. God's got this. It's His plan anyway. It's His ministry.
Yeah.
So let them do it, and let them do what they do best, and watch how God grows them too. So it's been really cool.
We've used this phrase, I don't remember where you picked it up, but the idea with our staff to try to really push delegation, the idea that like if you can get somebody to do it 80% of what you were doing it, you should delegate it. And man, that 80% sometimes is hard. Because we've actually seen that become reality where it's like, you know what, that is absolutely not 100%. It is definitely 80%.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But you know what we've seen in the long run is usually it comes back up. We forget that we weren't 100% either. You know what I mean? However many years ago, they just, and a lot of times, like you're saying, they get there faster than we do and then improve it. Now it's like 120%.
Oh, I said I'm a Bible major, not a math major. So that 80%, I never could add up to that much. So I'm like, if somebody asked me, well, isn't that volunteer at 80%? I probably would have went, no.
I don't understand. What does that mean?
Yeah, what's 80%? I can't add that high. Yeah, but again, that's one of those ways to control it.
Yeah.
Because they go, they're not ready. They're not ready. Well, how are they ever going to get ready if you don't let them do it? You know?
Yeah, totally.
I like that.
It was interesting for us because it's one thing to talk about it and totally believe in it. Yes, I totally believe I should delegate things at 80%. Mm-hmm. It is another thing when you walk in on Sunday and it's like, oh, wow. That is not 100%. You know what I mean? And if you care, if you're controlling like we are, that matters. It's like so. But that's been our experience too. Is that people get there, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, in the same kind of banner of longevity in ministry, we're gonna shift gears a little bit though, because we're gonna talk. We've talked delegation and what's it take to serve long term. But one of the things that you face, most of us, is conflict.
Ooh.
It's not. Church is not without its conflict.
Really?
For many different reasons. I know, it's surprising. I know, you would think, especially on staff, because that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Because you face a little bit of this.
Yeah.
And so I think it'd be helpful to talk through some of what you went through, some of those conflicts, not healthy. Like we're not talking about the kind of good, healthy conflict where we debate and we trust each other and we come out on the other end with a good solution, or we work together, or we're a team. You face some of the rough conflict. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about one instance in particular that we've talked about before, and then we can talk through that, because I think it'll be helpful for people to hear how you've dealt with it, how you've changed, and what it took to get through that and still want to be in ministry. Because a lot of people quit when it comes to this.
Yes.
So tell us about one of the things
that's one of my passions is helping people, and I always tell people, hey, if you're going through a rough time, call me. Because I can probably tell you a few stories that'll make you feel a whole lot better. And that you'll feel like, my situation's, not so bad. That grass isn't always greener somewhere else and usually if it is, it's because the cows have been there first. You know what I mean?
True.
So to get to the green grass, you're going to have to go through that stuff, So that was probably bad. But,
no, totally true.
But I was in a situation on a church staff where I didn't realize coming in that there was a lot of already underlying conflict. And I unfortunately got caught up in the middle of it and saw a lot of hurtful things. There was a lot of conflict between senior leadership and who was it got to be the point where they were almost pitting fellows. I mean, literally our staff was divided. Some were on team senior pastor, some were on team associate pastor. Okay. And there was this conflict going on. And I mean, our staff meetings were very, very short because they could hardly stand to be in the same room together. But yet out in public, nobody knew. And this went on for several years where our staff was functioning in a very dysfunctional way. I can't say functioning. We were dysfunctioning.
Getting by. But when you came on board, because it was, because it looked okay from the outside, you didn't know.
I didn't.
You didn't know what you were stepping into, which I see this time and time again. We were actually talking about this in a group we're both in, where it's so easy to take a job at a church and you really don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah.
Some cases it's because they're hiding things. Some cases it's not. They're just not. They're not even thinking, "Oh, I'm hiding it." They're just not. You haven't asked all the right questions.
And I honestly think that's what it was. I don't think they even saw it themselves of how bad it was.
Okay, it was like a blind spot. They didn't even realize.
Because I asked a lot of questions about that because I'd had some history in my past, And so I had some very specific questions about conflict. And the answers they all gave me were acceptable in my book.
Yeah, they were great.
So I didn't see anything red flagging me or even a yellow flag of caution. Hey, you ought to pay attention. I didn't see any of that. But as we started going, the ugliness started coming out. And then because I was still the new guy and I had become quick friends with the associate pastor, I was assumed to be team associate pastor. And so I became a target for the lead. And to the point where he literally tried to get rid of me a couple of times, tried to find another church for me to serve in. One time told me because my house hadn't sold back where I came from, that was God telling him that I should go back.
Interesting.
And I was like, and that episode happened in the first 8 months of me being there.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's going on? And it got to the point where I became very angry and very bitter, and I closed the silo door. I actually built the silo, and then it was a titanium door kind of thing. I mean, I literally, my office was on the upstairs of our church. I could park on the upper parking lot, walk straight in, go to my office, and walk straight back out and never see anybody else on staff an entire day. And I was perfectly content with that. I did my thing. When I went downstairs to the admin team, even some of them were kind of getting into the middle of it. They were getting sucked into it, and their spirits were even bitter towards me, and I was bitter towards them. And I became a very angry, bitter person. It affected me physically. I started having these hives that I'd get so tense I couldn't sleep, and my body would start breaking out into hives, and I had this swelling in my lips and my cheeks and my fingers. I mean, it was bad. And I was just very angry at the pastor because I had confronted him about once trying to get rid of me, and he lied to me. And then at that point, the associate pastor actually had stepped in and confronted, and that's when he admitted that, yes, this is what he was trying to do. And I mean, it was bad, and it got ugly. But here's the thing. I didn't let anybody know. I was very careful to my staff and my team of volunteers. And I stayed in this church 7 years. And nobody knew how bad it was. I think some people were picking it up because eventually that ugliness comes out.
Yeah, it spreads a little bit.
But what it was to my peers, when I would talk, I was very disrespectful. I was very angry. I called him the Grand Poobah. Hey man, I gotta tell you about the stupid decision the Grand Poobah made now. Guess what he's doing? This is just dumb. If I was leading, and I started putting myself above him, thinking my ministry was even better than what he was doing. Well, it's my ministry that's drawing people to the church, not his. I can count all these families that came and said, when I followed up with them to greet them to the church, how, man, we really loved the children's ministry. Our kids kept talking about it, and my ego just started inflating, and Satan started using all of that, and I started seeing the conflict, and I distanced myself. And like I said, I became a very unhealthy, unhappy person. It was affecting my family. It affected my marriage. My wife did not like me very much at the time. I mean, I don't know how she endured those years because I stopped being who I was. And those were the days where I probably should have gone to my North Star and remembered those things. But I was just surviving. I was just trying to go. I had some people telling me, you should leave. And I was like, well, I don't feel God telling me to go. And no doors have opened, so I can't leave. Again, that was probably a foolish thing on my part. But I started to realize that we needed to get healthy. And so I started talking to some leadership in our church that was set up when the conflict happened. This is where I should have gone months before. And so I wound up talking to them. And ultimately, we ended up having the Peacemakers ministry come in to try to do reconciliation. And I will tell you that was my first step to healing, is when I said, I'm going to embrace this program and I'm going to walk through the steps that the counseling team was going to walk me through. And I was going to be open and honest and vulnerable. And I started saying, okay, God, show me, I know I have a plank in my eye. I knew I did. I just didn't want to admit it. I felt like maybe it was toothpick size, but it was more like railroad tie size. And God really convicted me. We did a day of fasting and prayer and spending time in the Word, and I went and sat by a lake all day, and God just really convicted me over my disrespect for my pastor, and for allowing me to buy into some of the things that were happening and contributing to the conflict rather than helping it. I knew what the right way to handle it was. I should have gone to him, and I should have, when I had those times of confrontation, I should have worked it all the way out. I only did it enough to be tolerable rather than really being gut-wrenching honest and working that out. So I owned that I had a huge part of all of this. And we went and we sat in a meeting, and we were all supposed to be sharing what God spoke to us about. And I shared with him how he hurt me and all these different things. I had a laundry list, but it wasn't to beat him up with. It was part of that process that I needed to confess that these hurt me, because maybe he didn't even know. Yeah. And a lot of times we have people that have hurt us that they don't even know they hurt us, but we're carrying around this bag of rocks, as I describe it, on my back. And I ended up during that time sharing it with him, and his reaction was, and that was it.
Yeah, literally that gruntish
yes.
type, like a...
That's all he said. And I was devastated at first. Ultimately, it ended up that God did vindicate me, and that he had to leave, and I was asked to stay on staff, and I stayed for a few more years, and things got a little healthier, and then I felt God releasing me to go. But before I left, it was about a year later that I started meeting with a counselor, and I think that's one mistake sometimes we in ministry, we're scared to go get help, but I knew I needed help. It wasn't just enough for me. And it's not to say that God's word isn't enough. It is. I just wasn't handling it correctly. And I needed somebody else to go and speak truth into my life. And so I went to a counselor that I knew and trusted. And he walked me through true reconciliation again and forgiveness. And he said, Tom, if you saw this man alongside the road, it's pouring down rain, and he's broken down he's got a tire that's flat. And it's obvious he doesn't have a spare, and you come driving up on him. Would you just drive by and make sure your tire hits the puddle and you get him some more? Or would you just drive by and pray a prayer and say, oh, Lord, send somebody to help him? Or would you stop and get out and take him, drive him to where he needs to go and pay for a new tire? He said, would you go to those lengths? If you have forgiven him, you would definitely go to those lengths. And even if you saw him the next week broken down, you would do it again. And you would do it again. Because true forgiveness is I'm releasing that. And it doesn't matter whether he ever says even thank you. Or accepts it as a gift or anything. But what matters is you have that heart to say, I love you and we're brothers in Christ. And our relationship is more important than anything else. And that freed me up and released all this. And I ended up writing him a letter and expressing my love, and just that I was praying a blessing on the ministry that he was doing and his family. And again, reaffirming my apology to him. And I even told him, you don't even have to respond. If you want to, I'm open. I would love to see you again and talk. But even if you don't respond, it's okay. And I'll tell you, Nick, that set me free. And there are times I get flashbacks, and I'll feel that tension. If I hear a fellow kid minister or somebody that's in ministry and they're going through a hard time, and man, it does bring up some things. But I remind myself, he's forgiven, and I've forgiven him. So let it go. and that's those kind of things. I mean, now again, I think at that moment too, the reality of my calling, my North Star came back even clearer of going, okay, he has his calling. I've got my calling. We both have got to be the best that God made us to be. And so that really has been a huge thing for me. And I hope, like I said, I really do mean it, that people can talk to me about their stories, because I listen and I love walking through. I mean, I shouldn't say I love walking through, but it is actually therapeutic for me even to walk somebody through the process I went through. Because there's a lot of us that walk around, we get hurt by other leaders or volunteers, and we carry that pain, and it prevents us from doing all that God wants us to do.
And you said when your counselor asked you the question about him on the side of the road, he posed it like a question. Would you do this or would you do that? And you had to stop. You stopped and thought about it. Man. And that's when he was like, no. Clearly, you have not forgiven him because if you have to think about it.
True confession, yes. The first time he asked that question, and he would ask that question fairly regularly. He rephrased
so it kept coming back.
But that very first time he asked me, there was a long silent pause.
And he was like, wrong.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Thinking about it is a no, which is wrong. Yeah.
So if you were to say, Tom, would you stop if you saw him? Now there's no hesitation. Yes, I'd stop and fix his tire, and I would pay for it. I'd do whatever I needed to do for him because I want him to be the best child of God he can be. Yeah. And I want to be the best. And it's not worth carrying that stuff around.
Yeah. It just hurts you. Obviously it would probably hurt him. It's probably still hurting you. Yeah. Who knows? But you don't even know that. You just know that it's hurting you.
You hold yourself hostage.
Yeah.
You're really the hostage taker because you're keeping that in. And there's no reason. God didn't design it for us to hold it in. He doesn't want us to hold those things in. He wants to set us free. And Jesus said, I've come to give you life and to live it abundantly. You can't live an abundant life, and you really can't serve effectively if you're carrying that stuff around on you.
Yeah.
It's like a backpack full of rocks. I went out to Yosemite one time and was hiking, and I got to a point where I was hiking by this stream, and all along the stream were these trees, and they were dead. And God really this was probably as close to an audible voice as I've ever heard of saying, that's you. You're serving the river of life. You're telling people about the river of life, but this is you. You're dead. You're right here on the shore, and you're dead. And then I got to this halfway bridge, and God was like, "You're not going across here yet until you do business with me." And I literally sat there with a marker and grabbed. I was picking up stones, and I was writing the things that I had been carrying around with me. And that was one of those times I had to rehash some of this forgiveness stuff.
Yeah,
because even his name went on one of those rocks, and I tossed it into the river. And every time I tossed one in, I'd say, I forgive you. Mm-hmm. You're forgiven. May God bless you. And once I did that, it took about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. I lost track of all time. And I just sat there and worshiping God and releasing those things. And I literally, it sounds foolish, but I walked across that bridge and I felt like an 8-year-old kid. And I literally, I'm not ashamed to admit this, I skipped down this path, just overjoyed that I was free of all this weight.
Yeah.
And then I stopped and I looked, and everything on that side of the river was lush and green and beautiful. And again, that voice, this is where you stay.
Yeah.
If you don't forgive, if you carry this, if you try to be the Superman, the hero, you're not going to be long in ministry. You're going to be dead.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't stay that way. You need to be walking along with me. And I'm like, I literally just was like, yes, Lord, yes. And no kidding. There was this big old mule deer that I came around the corner and he's standing there drinking water out of that river.
Yeah.
And what do you picture? As the deer pants for the water, so my soul. And I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to be that deer. I'm going to be those trees that are that are green and lush. And, yeah, man, those were such freeing moments for me that when conflict happens, you've got to deal with it quick and you got to be honest. And there's nothing more valuable than having a team that can be real and says, there's nothing more valuable than how my relationship was with you. I don't care. You can be the best preacher, the best teacher, the best small group leader, whatever. You can be the best kids pastor in the world. But if you don't value your staff and your team, that you, as brothers and sisters in Christ, that is the most important thing, all your stuff is that stuff that makes the grass greener.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's empty. It's, Paul said it. It's crap. Mm-hmm. And I just don't want to be that person ever again. I don't ever want to go back there. And the only way I can't go back there is say, make sure that in my current team, if I've got an issue, I go to, and I'm a conflict avoider. I hate conflict. And I know a lot of kids pastors are. We hate that. We want to be nice to them and we don't want to make them feel bad. But at times we got to speak the truth and say, you know what, you really hurt me. But here's the deal. I forgive you and I love you. And it doesn't matter. Maybe you didn't even know, but I want you to know it's forgiven because I've been carrying this and I've been thinking these bad thoughts about you. I called you Graham Poobah behind your back. And I'm not ever going to refer to you like that again in a mean tone.
Yeah.
I want to work on this relationship with you. Don't let conflict break. I mean, man, what a difference in the kingdom if people would stop seeing churches break down like this and split and divide over really what is personal relationships, ultimately, our pride, our arrogance. And so, God's really freed me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've made it through the other side. And now I look back and go, you know what? God never wastes my pain. He doesn't waste it. They hurt. I hurt. I mean, there were so many times I'd go home in tears and bawl through the night. I couldn't sleep. But now on the other side, like I said, when I hear somebody tell me a story, I hurt for them, but I also know there's hope on the other side. And I love doing what I'm doing now. And because I know who I am and I know what God's wired me to be. And I know that when there's a conflict, I'll work through it. It'll be okay. I don't have to unfriend them. You don't have to kill them on Facebook. But you can work through it, and there is light on the other side of that, but you got to take the right steps.
And I want people to, they probably get this, and some people are in the situation, so I want to make sure people understand too. Part of the story is that your leader was not healthy. Mm-hmm. It was not leading well.
Right.
And that is a reality. Like, we want to believe that it never happens in churches, but the reality is you can be in a church where there's just a problem there.
Right.
And it could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be senior leadership. It could be somewhere else on staff. That's one thing. Two, he never did contact you back.
No.
This is not like you go on the story, beautiful.
I can't say we go golfing together.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So, who knows, what's going on there. So I just want people to know that, because I think sometimes people, you and I have talked about this, feel stuck.
Yeah.
Like there isn't an audible call or something to leave, yet it's clearly unhealthy.
Yep.
Or the expectation is that it can end up being this perfect bow on the end, package thing, and it's not going to be that either. So I don't have the answer for it. I want people to take that from your story.
Yes.
That, sometimes things aren't right, and you do need to decide if you want to stay or go.
Yes.
It's like our friend Jim Weidman's resource.
Yes.
You should pick that up.
It's an awesome resource.
Yeah, it's called Stay or Go.
And I will say, I got to a point in one of my other churches where I said, this is not healthy. It's time for me to get out.
Yeah.
I will also say to that other story, my original story, is that I don't think God was going to let me go until I dealt with everything. Because why do I want to take my junk to another church?
Yes, that's true.
Because that's going to come out.
Yeah, he did a work in you.
He did.
Before you left.
Oh, man. Total changeover in my heart. And because I was, again, I thought, I'll just move on. But God was like, no, it was just like the bridge. I couldn't cross that bridge. I couldn't go over there. I knew I couldn't walk across that. It was the weirdest thing I've ever. I'm an old Baptist guy, and Baptists don't have these kind of encounters. We read them in the Bible, but we don't get this stuff.
Yeah.
No offense to my full spirit brothers, but I didn't get that stuff. But I do now. Yeah. I tell you, man, God opened my eyes to that, and I really felt like that bridge illustration and that experience out there in Yosemite was what happened there, because actually I was living in Pennsylvania at the time. That encounter with God and that same thing. So I think there's some times where God's not going to let you out of a ministry until you deal with it the right way. Because he doesn't want you to go and take that problem. Because we all know we have other people who get mad at another church and they come to ours. They just bring their junk with them.
Yeah.
And so God wasn't going to let me take my garbage. He wanted me to throw it to him, leave it at his feet. He's already handled all of it. He's a big God. He's the creator. He's, all those things we know as truth. But they are truth. They're not cliche. And I just felt like God was like, okay, now that you've done business, I'm going to open you to a new place. And man, he opened so many doors for me. It was incredible. And so I think sometimes when you feel that stuck, maybe one of the reasons why you're stuck is because you haven't dealt with it enough yet. Yeah. And you may need to get some counseling. You may need to talk to somebody. People can call me. I'm sure they can call you too. Reach out to somebody. Don't just sit there. Again, I'm going to refer to Jim, the rut, the definition of a rut is just a coffin with both ends kicked out. Don't get stuck in the rut, don't be dead. And so sometimes I think we gotta do that business so then we can walk and get around there and see the beauty that God has on the other side of it, both in the ministry that you do, but in the relationships you have. And that sets you up for long. I mean, you can keep going after that. And I have no doubt that God wants me to stay in ministry and keep serving and building the kingdom and networking and coaching more people. And, so I take the pain and suffering and the lessons I've learned and try to pass them on as much as I can.
That's awesome. I appreciate you opening up about it. I know that's not always easy, but I think it's really helpful for other people. Before we wrap up, we can't wrap up without talking about KMC and Kids Ministry Collective. So for anybody that's not familiar, tell us about the group, the podcast.
Yeah. Kid Ministry Collective came up a number of years ago. A buddy of mine, Ron Brooks, and I started talking about, we both were serving in smaller churches, and there wasn't a lot of resources there for us and ways to connect. We met each other really through CM Connect with Michael Chanley and stuff. And then we started going to conferences and we were connecting there. But one of the things we discovered was at that time, there wasn't a real collective group besides like even Kidology. Kidology was there, but there wasn't anything else that we felt connected to. And so we came up with Kid Ministry Collective first as a Facebook group, but then first as a podcast or a recording, live radio call. Where we did the show and we did interviews and we did virtual roundtable discussions. And all it was to say, look, we want to, iron sharpens iron. That was our theme verse. And so we just wanted to bring a collective group of people who maybe weren't on the big stages of conferences, but were on the front lines of ministry and use their collective experiences and wisdom to help each other. And so we started the KMC and it went from the radio show to now it's a podcast and a Facebook group and we had a blog going, but we've kind of said, you know what, we were getting too distracted with that. So let's focus on these two things. And obviously we had you on there.
Yeah,
ratings went way up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, people can skip that episode 2, whatever that was. But, it gets a lot better after that. Yeah. That's awesome.
Because, we just relaunched the podcast not long ago. So, you're on episode 50-something, and you'll be doing your 100th episode soon. And we're on, episode 13 or something.
Yeah, because you did kind of start over. So you had some previous ones, but when you started over and put it on iTunes.
People can still find some of the old ones, I think, through iTunes. But on CM Connect's website, I think they're still there as resources. I don't know. I'd have to go back and check that.
Yeah, but the new thing is it's easy to find KMC,
KMC, Kid Ministry Collective, right on iTunes, and we're working hard to get more fresh episodes up and going. So
cool, and we'll link to that too. Is there any other way people could connect with you, or if they have any questions?
PT Bump is my Twitter name, just Pastor Tom Bump, but PT Bump, Pastor Tom Bump on Facebook, if they message me through one of those, I'd be happy to connect up and talk. And like I say, if somebody's hurting and needs a place to safely vent, call me and we'll connect up. So
cool. Well, thank you.
Yeah, man.
Now we can head back out and suffer through this 75-degree weather.
Let's suffer. Let's suffer.
That's right.
I'm all for it.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, man.
See ya.
I love how open and honest Tom was there, being vulnerable, talking about the ways that he could have done a better job with that whole scenario there. And I just know many of you listening, you're in tough situations, maybe not as bad as the one that Tom had, but maybe there's just some conflict or some tension and something needs to be done. A conversation needs to be had, something about that. So that's one of the action steps I would give coming out of this podcast is have the conversation. That's one of the values for our church staff team. The idea that if there's something that needs to be said or followed up on or discussed, have the conversation. So who is it that you need to have a conversation with because, something in the relationship is just not right? Another action step is to delegate. Tom talked about how important that was for him. And if you need some resources and tips and tools on delegating, we're going to link to a post that I wrote one time that shares everything our staff has used, mostly from other sources, to help us delegate. And you can also get it at nickblevins.com/delegate, but we'll link to it in the show notes as well. And then another action step would be to get counseling. Just like Tom talked about, that was really helpful for him. And I think sometimes we put a stigma on it that's just unnecessary. Some of the healthiest people I know are regularly seeing counselors, and they would talk about it from a maintenance standpoint or just from the standpoint of needing someone else to talk to and who they trust, who can press into their life that really, has no personal agenda or anything like that. They just want to help you be healthy. So I think that's crucial. You can get links, all the links we talked about in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 40.
Be sure to subscribe. As always, we got another interview next week. We're going to dig in behind the scenes of some leadership development, so you don't want to miss it. We'll see you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.